She sat silent in the corner of Pine Ridge Academy's library for 3 years, invisible, ignored, the scholarship kid everyone called the Ghost. But Sophia Chen carried a secret that would shock the entire elite boarding school. Her dead father was a special forces ranger who'd trained her in combat techniques most soldiers never master. And she'd made a promise to her mother to never ever use them. Marcus Wellington III didn't know any of this when he decided to make her his favorite target. The son of a billionaire who'd already hospitalized 2 students at his previous schools, Marcus ruled Pine Ridge through fear and Daddy's donations. He filmed her illegally in her dorm room, destroyed her quantum physics notebooks with coffee, demanded she kneel and apologize for existing in his space. For 3 years, Sophia absorbed every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment of torment, while her muscle memory screamed at her to unleash the violence encoded in her bones since she was 7 years old. The other students thought she was weak, pathetic, just another charity case too poor to fight back. They had no idea they were watching a trained weapon choosing not to fire. A girl who could disable a grown man in under 4 seconds, forcing herself to play victim. But everyone has a breaking point, and when Marcus's hand connected with her face in front of dozens of recording phones, when his class ring split her lip and drew blood, something inside Sophia Chen finally snapped. What happened next took less time than reading this sentence. A grab, a twist, a throw that sent Marcus Wellington crashing through a table while the entire library watched in shock. The ghost of Pine Ridge Academy had just revealed herself as something else entirely, and the video was already going viral. This is the true story of the quiet girl who hid special forces training for 3 years until the day she couldn't anymore, the moment that would destroy a bully's empire and reveal that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who chooses not to fight until there's no choice left. The morning fog rolled across Pine Ridge Academy's sprawling campus like a living thing, creeping between the Gothic revival buildings that had stood for over a century. Sophia Chen sat in the furthest corner of the vast library, her slight frame nearly disappearing into the oversized armchair she'd claimed as her own since arriving at the prestigious boarding school 3 years ago. The leather was worn smooth where countless students had sat before her, but none had made it their sanctuary quite like she had. At 16, Sophia possessed the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable. It wasn't shyness exactly, but rather a quality of deliberate invisibility, as if she'd learned to occupy space without disturbing the air around her. Her dark hair fell straight past her shoulders, often hiding her face as she bent over advanced mathematics textbooks that weren't part of any curriculum Pine Ridge offered. Most students assumed she was just another scholarship kid, grinding away at grades she needed to maintain her place among the elite. They had no idea how wrong they were. The library at dawn was her domain. The head librarian, Ms. Margaret Sterling, had given her a key after finding her waiting outside the doors every morning for a month straight during her freshman year. Now, as autumn painted the New Hampshire mountains in brilliant flames of color, Sophia had her routine perfected. Arrive at 6 a.m., settle into her corner by 6:05, lose herself in quantum mechanics or theoretical physics until 7:45, then slip into the stream of students heading to first period like a ghost joining a parade. Her fingers absently trace the edge of a small medallion hidden beneath her oversized sweater. The metal was warm against her skin, worn smooth by constant touching. It bore an inscription she knew by heart. Major Thomas Chen, 75th Ranger Regiment, honor and courage above all. Some daughters wore their father's class rings or kept photos in lockets. Sophia wore his Ranger tab against her heart, the last piece of him that hadn't been buried in Arlington National Cemetery. The peaceful morning shattered at 7:15 when the library doors burst open with unnecessary force. Marcus Wellington III entered like he owned the air everyone else was breathing, which, considering his father's real estate empire controlled half of New England's commercial properties, wasn't far from the truth. His presence transformed any space into a stage, and he never performed without an audience. Today's supporting cast included his constant shadows: Victor Petrov, whose diplomat father had secured his place at Pine Ridge despite numerous disciplinary issues at his previous schools, and James J. Harrington, heir to a banking fortune that traced its roots back to the Gilded Age. Marcus's eyes swept across the library with predatory efficiency. The few early morning students suddenly found urgent reasons to relocate, gathering their materials with practiced haste. They'd learned through painful experience that being present for Marcus's entertainment meant risking becoming part of it. But Sophia didn't move. She never did. It had become something of a challenge between them, though only Marcus seemed to be playing. "Well, well," Marcus announced, his voice carrying that particular blend of privilege and malice that seemed bred into certain bloodlines. "The Phantom of Pine Ridge actually exists before 8 a.m. I was starting to think you were some kind of collective hallucination." Sophia's eyes remained fixed on her textbook. Though she'd stopped processing the words the moment the doors had opened, she'd learned to track threats through peripheral vision and sound, skills taught by a father who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, only to die in a training exercise at Fort Benning when she was 12. Major Chen had believed in preparation, in awareness, in the importance of knowing your environment even when you appeared oblivious to it. Marcus approached with deliberate slowness, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors in a rhythm that seemed designed to build tension. Victor and Jay flanked him, their formation so practiced it might have been choreographed. They stopped at Sophia's table, Marcus leaning down to examine her work with theatrical interest. "Advanced quantum mechanics," he read from the textbook's spine, his voice dripping mock admiration. "How adorable." "The charity case thinks she's Einstein." He picked up her notebook, flipping through pages covered in complex equations with the casual disregard of someone who'd never had to ask permission for anything. "Tell me, Chen, do these formulas help you calculate how many floors your mother has to scrub to pay for your textbooks?" The insult was crafted to wound, but Marcus had his facts wrong. Sophia's mother, Dr. Linda Chen, was a cardiac surgeon at Boston General. Her scholarship to Pine Ridge wasn't based on financial need, but on academic excellence. She'd scored in the 99th percentile on every standardized test she'd ever taken. But correcting Marcus would mean engaging with him, and Sophia had learned that silence was often the most effective shield against cruelty. She reached for her notebook with steady hands, but Marcus pulled it back, holding it just out of reach. It was a childish game, the kind of power play that shouldn't have worked on anyone over the age of 10. But in the ecosystem of Pine Ridge Academy, where social hierarchy determined everything from lunch seating to college recommendations, these small humiliations carried weight. "I asked you a question," Marcus said, his tone shifting from amusement to something harder. "It's rude not to answer when someone's talking to you. Didn't your father teach you any manners before he..." He paused, pretending to search for the right word. "Departed." The temperature in Sophia's corner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Her hand, which had been reaching for the notebook, slowly lowered to the table. For the first time since Marcus had entered, she looked directly at him. Her eyes were the color of winter storms, gray with hints of steel that made Victor unconsciously take a step backward. "My father," Sophia said, her voice quiet but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before, "taught me many things." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that Marcus was too arrogant to recognize. He saw her response as capitulation, the ghost finally acknowledging the living. His smile widened, sensing blood in the water. Did he now? Marcus dropped the notebook on the table, but deliberately knocked over Sophia's coffee in the process. The dark liquid spread across her papers, soaking into hours of carefully transcribed notes. Oops, how clumsy of me. Though I suppose you're used to things being messy, given your circumstances. Jay laughed, the sound sharp and reflexive, more about maintaining his position in the pecking order than finding anything genuinely funny. Victor remained silent, his eyes fixed on Sophia with an expression that might have been recognition or concern. He'd seen that particular stillness before, in his father's bodyguards, moments before violence erupted at diplomatic events. It was the calm of someone choosing not to act, not the paralysis of someone unable to. Sophia stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 5'4", she had to look up to meet Marcus's eyes, but something in her posture made the height difference seem irrelevant. She began gathering her ruined materials with mechanical precision, wringing coffee from pages that would never be readable again. Tomorrow, Marcus said, leaning close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and overwhelming that probably cost more than most people's rent. We're going to have a proper conversation, one where you actually participate. I'm curious to see if ghosts can bleed. The threat was delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Marcus turned and walked away, his entourage following like wake behind a ship. The library gradually returned to life, students emerging from their hiding spots with the cautious movements of prey animals after a predator passes. Sophia remained standing for a long moment after they left, staring at her destroyed notes. 3 years of work, gone in an instant of petty cruelty. Her laptop, ancient but functional, had been closed when the coffee spilled, sparing it from damage. But the notebooks were irreplaceable, containing not just class notes, but equations she'd been working on independently, theories she'd been developing about quantum entanglement that her physics teacher said were graduate-level work. Ms. Sterling appeared beside her with paper towels and a sympathetic expression. The elderly librarian had worked at Pine Ridge for 30 years, long enough to see patterns repeat across generations of entitled children playing at cruelty. I can speak to the administration, Ms. Sterling offered quietly, though they both knew it would accomplish nothing. Marcus Wellington's family had donated the new science center. Their name was etched in marble above the main entrance. The administration would express concern, perhaps have a conversation with Marcus about appropriate behavior, and nothing would change. Thank you, Sophia said, accepting the paper towels. But it's fine. Miss Sterling studied her for a moment, seeing something in the girl's controlled calm that reminded her of soldiers she'd known, men and women who'd returned from war with 1,000-yard stares and the ability to remain perfectly still while chaos erupted around them. Is it? The librarian asked. Sophia didn't answer, focusing instead on salvaging what she could from the coffee-soaked disaster. But her hand kept returning to the medallion beneath her sweater, feeling the raised letters of her father's name, remembering his voice during those long training sessions in their backyard. Violence is always a choice, Sophie, Major Chen had said, demonstrating a throw that could put someone twice his size on the ground. Having the ability doesn't create the obligation. The strongest warriors are the ones who choose when not to fight. She'd been 7 years old, learning moves that most soldiers didn't master until advanced combat training. Her father had started teaching her after a series of break-ins in their neighborhood, wanting his daughter to be prepared for a world that didn't always play by rules. He'd taught her Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the kind of dirty fighting that kept you alive when rules went out the window. But more importantly, he'd taught her restraint. Anyone can throw a punch, he'd said, correcting her stance during a particularly frustrating session. It takes real strength to take one and choose not to respond. Remember that, Sophie. The moment you let someone else's actions control your reactions, You've already lost. Those lessons had carried her through 3 years at Pine Ridge, through countless moments of provocation and humiliation. Marcus wasn't the first to target her, though he was the most persistent. Her scholarship status, her quietness, her refusal to engage in the complex social dynamics of the school, they all marked her as different, and different was dangerous in the carefully controlled ecosystem of elite education. That evening, Sophia sat in her dorm room, another perk of her scholarship that she suspected had more to do with the administration's recognition that she wouldn't thrive with a roommate than any generosity on their part. The walls were bare except for a single photo. Her and her father at his promotion ceremony, both of them grinning at the camera with identical expressions of pride. She'd been 10, still believing he was invincible, still thinking that all the training and preparation meant he'd always come home. The training accident that killed him had been described in frustratingly vague terms. A nighttime exercise at Fort Benning, equipment failure, 3 soldiers dead, including Major Thomas Chen. The army had provided full honors at his funeral, a folded flag that her mother kept in a glass case, and a lifetime of questions that would never be answered. Sophia had been 12, old enough to understand that training accident sometimes meant classified operation, young enough to be destroyed by the loss. Her mother had responded to grief by throwing herself into her work, taking extra shifts at the hospital, saving lives as if each one might somehow balance the cosmic scales. She'd also made Sophia promise to never use the combat training her father had provided. That knowledge died with him, Dr. Linda Chen had said, her voice thick with tears and determination. I won't lose you to violence too. Promise me, Sophia. Promise me you'll never use what he taught you. Sophia had promised, and for 4 years she'd kept that promise. Through middle school bullying, through the transition to Pine Ridge, through every moment when her muscle memory screamed at her to respond to threats with the decisive violence her father had encoded into her bones. She'd chosen invisibility instead, becoming the ghost Marcus had named her, existing in spaces without truly inhabiting them. But tomorrow loomed in her mind like a storm system moving in from the Atlantic. Marcus's threat hadn't been idle. She'd learned to read the difference between performance and promise, and there had been something in his eyes that suggested he was escalating beyond his usual games. The question was whether she could survive that escalation while keeping her promise to her mother. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Long shift tonight. There's money in your account for dinner. Love you. Sophia smiled slightly at the message. Her mother tried so hard to maintain normalcy, to pretend that their lives hadn't been shattered and reconstructed into something functional, but never quite whole. The money would be enough for the expensive meal plan Pine Ridge offered, but Sophia would likely just grab a protein bar from the vending machine and continue working on salvaging her notes. She opened her laptop and began reconstructing what she could from memory. The quantum mechanics equations flowed easily. She'd been working on them for months, and they were practically etched into her brain. But the personal theories, the creative leaps she'd been making in connecting quantum entanglement to larger universal forces, those were harder to recapture. Like trying to rebuild a dream after waking, the edges kept fuzzing. The connections that had seemed so clear now frustratingly just out of reach. A knock at her door interrupted her work. Sophia froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was past 9 p.m., beyond the hours when casual visits were common. She moved to the door silently, a habit from years of training, and looked through the peephole. Miss Sterling stood in the hallway, holding a banker's box. Sophia opened the door, confusion evident on her face. The librarian smiled and lifted the box slightly. I thought you might need these, she said, stepping inside when Sophia moved aside. The box was full of notebooks, the same brand and style Sophia used. I've been at Pine Ridge long enough to know that some losses are too significant to simply accept. Consider it an investment in your future discoveries. Sophia stared at the gift, something tight in her chest, loosening slightly. Thank you. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Miss Sterling set the box on Sophia's desk, her expression serious. I've watched too many brilliant students get ground down by this place. The ones with money use it like a weapon. The ones without learn to either fight back or disappear. You've chosen a third path, haven't you? Endurance. Sophia didn't answer, but Miss Sterling seemed to take her silence as confirmation. Your father was military, wasn't he? The librarian continued. I can see it in how you move, how you observe everything while appearing to notice nothing. My late husband was Marine Force Recon. I recognize the training. He was Army, Sophia said quietly. 75th Rangers. Ms. Sterling nodded slowly. Elite forces. He taught you, didn't he? More than just the physical training, the mental discipline, the tactical awareness. She moved toward the door, then paused. There's something you should know about Marcus Wellington. This isn't his first school. Pine Ridge is his third in 4 years. The other 2 expelled him for incidents that his father's lawyers made disappear. But records have a way of surfacing if you know where to look. She pulled a thin folder from her bag and set it on top of the box of notebooks. I'm not suggesting you do anything with this information. But knowledge is power, and you seem like someone who understands the value of intelligence gathering. Before Sophia could respond, Ms. Sterling was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. Sophia stared at the folder for a long moment before opening it. Inside were newspaper clippings, police reports with names redacted but details intact, and medical records that shouldn't have been accessible to a school librarian. Marcus Wellington had put 2 students in the hospital at his previous schools. One had suffered permanent nerve damage. The other had attempted suicide after months of sustained harassment. Sophia closed the folder, her hands steady despite the rage building in her chest. This wasn't just bullying. This was predation, a pattern of escalating violence that Pine Ridge Academy was enabling through willful blindness. Tomorrow's threatened confrontation took on new dimensions, transforming from personal annoyance to potential catastrophe. She returned to her laptop, but instead of working on physics equations, she began researching. Marcus Wellington's digital footprint was extensive but carefully curated, the kind of online presence that suggested professional management. But Sophia had learned from her father that everyone left traces, patterns that revealed truth beneath performance. She found deleted social media posts cached on archive sites, comments on forums that linked to burner accounts, a digital trail of cruelty that painted a picture of someone who didn't just enjoy causing pain, but required it, like an addiction that demanded ever-increasing doses. The research consumed hours, pulling her down rabbit holes of connections and implications. Viktor Petrov emerged as more than just a follower. His own history included violence that diplomatic immunity had shielded from consequences. Jay Harrington was weaker, going along to maintain his social position but showing signs of discomfort in some videos where Marcus's behavior crossed obvious lines. He might be the weak link, the one who could be turned if pressure was applied correctly. By 3 a.m., Sophia had constructed a detailed psychological profile of her tormentor. Marcus Wellington wasn't just entitled and cruel. He was escalating toward something darker, something that would eventually destroy someone if it wasn't stopped. The question was whether she would be that someone, or whether she could find a way to redirect his trajectory without violating her promise to her mother. She finally collapsed into bed as dawn began creeping across the mountains, her dreams filled with combat sequences her father had drilled into her until they became automatic. In her sleep, she moved through forms with perfect precision, each strike and block flowing into the next like a deadly dance. But even in dreams, she pulled her punches, stopped before impact, choosing restraint even in the realm of unconscious thought. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made New Hampshire famous for its falls. Sophia woke early, despite her late night, her body conditioned to function on minimal sleep, another gift from her father's training. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that allowed for movement, while maintaining the carefully cultivated invisibility she'd perfected. The medallion went beneath her shirt as always, the metal cold against her skin before her body heat warmed it. She arrived at the library at her usual time, settling into her corner with the new notebooks Ms. Sterling had provided. The normalcy was deliberate, a message to anyone watching that she wouldn't be moved by threats or intimidation. But her awareness was heightened, tracking every sound, every movement in her peripheral vision. She'd identified 3 exit routes, 2 improvised weapons within reach, and had positioned herself to see anyone approaching while keeping her back protected. Marcus didn't disappoint. He arrived at 7:20, 5 minutes later than yesterday, but with an energy that suggested he'd been anticipating this moment. He wasn't alone. Victor and Jay flanked him as usual, but there were others today. A small crowd of students who'd heard about yesterday's confrontation and wanted to witness whatever drama was about to unfold. The modern Colosseum had traded stone for mahogany paneling, but the bloodlust remained unchanged. "Good morning, Ghost," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the library. Several students had their phones out, ready to capture whatever was about to happen. Ready for that conversation we discussed. Sophia closed her notebook slowly, marking her place with deliberate calm. When she looked up at Marcus, there was something different in her expression. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of resigned preparation, like someone accepting an inevitable storm. "What conversation would that be?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. Marcus's eyes lit up with pleasure. The ghost was finally engaging, finally playing the game. He moved closer, the crowd following like iron filings drawn to a magnet. "The one where you explain why you think you belong here," Marcus said. "Pine Ridge has standards, traditions. We don't usually accept charity cases, but somehow you slipped through. I think it's time we corrected that oversight." "I earned my place here," Sophia replied, standing slowly. The movement was fluid, controlled, nothing like the awkward uncertainty most teenagers displayed. "My test scores were higher than yours. My grades are better than yours. By every academic metric that actually matters, I belong here more than you do." The library went silent. Nobody spoke to Marcus Wellington that way. Even teachers moderated their criticism, aware of the power his family wielded. But Sophia had decided something during her long night of research. If confrontation was inevitable, she would meet it on her own terms. Marcus's face darkened, the playful cruelty replaced by something more dangerous. "Test scores," he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than shouting. "You think test scores matter? My family built the science center you study in. My father's donations pay for the scholarships that keep you here. You exist at Pine Ridge because we allow it." "I exist at Pine Ridge because I earned it," Sophia countered. "Your money can buy buildings and influence, but it can't buy intelligence or character. And deep down in that part of yourself you've buried under privilege and cruelty, you know that. That's why you target people like me. We remind you that everything you have was given, not earned." Victor stepped forward, his hand moving to Marcus's shoulder in what might have been support or restraint. But Marcus shrugged him off, his attention fully focused on Sophia. The crowd pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "You want to talk about earning?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showing a video that made Sophia's blood run cold. It was security footage from the previous night, showing Miss Sterling entering her dorm room with the box. But the angle was wrong, not from the hallway cameras, but from somewhere inside her room. "I know all about your little gift from the librarian. Did you really think you had privacy here? I own this school, Ghost. I own everything in it, including you." The violation hit Sophia like a physical blow. Her room, her sanctuary, had been compromised. The rage that she'd kept carefully controlled for 3 years began rising, hot and dangerous. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Anger makes you stupid, Sophie. It makes you predictable. Use it. Don't let it use you." "That's illegal," she said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "Recording someone without consent." "Prove it," Marcus interrupted. "The footage could have come from anywhere. Maybe you set up the camera yourself, trying to frame me. Who do you think they'll believe? The girl whose mother can barely afford her meal plan, or the family that keeps this place running?" He stepped closer, close enough that Sophia could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he'd won, thought he'd finally broken through her walls. He had no idea what was actually happening, what doors he was opening that should have remained sealed. "But I'm feeling generous," Marcus continued. "Kneel and apologize for your disrespect, and I'll consider letting you finish the semester before having you expelled." The crowd gasped. Even for Marcus, this was extreme. Jay looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Victor's expression was unreadable, but his body language suggested preparation for violence. Sophia felt the moment crystallize around her. Everything her father had taught her about reading situations, about understanding when violence became inevitable, told her this was a crossroads. Marcus wouldn't stop here. The research she'd done last night showed a pattern of escalation that ended with destroyed lives. If she knelt, if she submitted, she might survive, but someone else would eventually pay the price. The next scholarship student, the next person who couldn't fight back. "No," she said simply. Marcus blinked, as if the word was in a language he didn't speak. "No? No, I won't kneel. No, I won't apologize. And no, you don't own me." Sophia's voice carried a quiet authority that made several students step back unconsciously. "You're a small, pathetic person who mistakes fear for respect and cruelty for strength. Your father's money might protect you from consequences, but it can't change what you are." The slap came without warning, Marcus's hand connecting with Sophia's face hard enough to snap her head to the side. The crack echoed through the library like a gunshot. Blood immediately welled from where his class ring had split her lip. The crowd stood frozen, phones capturing every second. Even Victor looked shocked. Physical violence, especially against a female student, crossed a line that even Pine Ridge's culture of privilege usually respected. Sophia touched her lip, looking at the blood on her fingers with an expression that transformed from shock to something else, something that made the nearest student scramble backward. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, he saw what lay beneath her carefully maintained control. It wasn't fear, it wasn't submission. It was the kind of controlled violence that special forces operators carried in their bones, the trained capacity for destruction held in check by discipline alone. Time seemed to slow as Sophia made her choice. 3 years of restraint, 3 years of honoring her promise to her mother, 3 years of absorbing abuse without response. All of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Her father had taught her that violence should never be the first response, or the second, or even the third. But he'd also taught her that sometimes, when all other options were exhausted, when the threat was clear and present and growing, violence became not just acceptable, but necessary. Her body moved with the fluid precision of muscle memory encoded since childhood. The basic principle was simple: redirect force. Use the opponent's strength against them. Strike at points of maximum vulnerability with minimum effort. Marcus was bigger, stronger, but he was also untrained, unprepared, and completely unaware of the danger he'd awakened. Sophia's hand shot out, grabbing Marcus's wrist as he pulled back from the slap. Her grip was iron, her thumb finding the pressure point that made his hand spasm involuntarily. As he jerked back in surprise, she pivoted, using his momentum against him. Her other hand found his elbow, applying pressure at just the right angle to hyperextend the joint without breaking it, though the margin was measured in millimeters. Marcus screamed, the sound high and shocked. He tried to pull away, but that only increased the pressure on his elbow. Sophia stepped inside his guard, her knee driving into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The air left his lungs in a whoosh, his body folding forward instinctively. She released his arm and grabbed his shoulders, guiding his forward momentum into a modified hip throw that sent him crashing into a study table. The entire sequence had taken less than 4 seconds. Marcus hit the table hard, the wood splintering under his weight. He rolled off onto the floor, gasping for air, his arm cradled against his chest. The library erupted in chaos, students screaming, phones flashing, someone calling for security. But Sophia stood perfectly still in the center of it all, her breathing controlled, her stance relaxed but ready. Victor moved toward her, his own training evident in how he approached, balanced, cautious, professional. But he stopped when Sophia shifted slightly, her body language making it clear that approaching would be a mistake. "He hit first," Victor said, his accent thicker under stress. Everyone saw it, this was self-defense. It was an unexpected alliance, but Sophia recognized the recognition in Victor's eyes. He knew trained violence when he saw it, knew the difference between someone who fought from emotion and someone who fought from skill. His diplomat father probably employed bodyguards with similar training. Security arrived within minutes, followed quickly by the administration. Dean Richardson, a man who'd perfected the art of managing scandal, surveyed the scene with the expression of someone watching his career potentially ending. Marcus Wellington Jr. was on the floor, being examined by the school nurse. Sophia Chen stood calmly nearby, blood still dripping from her split lip. Dozens of students had recorded everything. "Everyone to your dormitories immediately," Dean Richardson commanded. "Except you, Miss Chen, and someone help Mr. Wellington to the medical center." As students filed out, many looked at Sophia with expressions ranging from awe to fear to something like respect. The ghost of Pine Ridge had revealed herself as something else entirely, something dangerous and unexpected. The disciplinary hearing that followed was a masterclass in institutional damage control. Marcus's parents arrived within the hour, their lawyer in tow. Sophia's mother drove up from Boston, still in her scrubs from an interrupted surgery. The recorded evidence was reviewed, statements were taken, and the truth became impossible to deny. Marcus had struck first, Sophia had defended herself. But truth and consequences rarely aligned at Pine Ridge Academy. "While we acknowledge that Mr. Wellington initiated physical contact," Dean Richardson said, his words carefully chosen, "Miss Chen's response was disproportionate and dangerous. The level of force used was textbook self-defense," Dr. Linda Chen interrupted, her voice carrying the same quiet authority her daughter had displayed. "I've watched the video. My daughter used minimum force necessary to stop an assault. The fact that Mr. Wellington was unprepared for someone to defend themselves doesn't make her response disproportionate." Harrison Wellington Sr. looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. His son's humiliation had gone viral within the Pine Ridge community, the video spreading through group chats and social media, despite the administration's attempts to contain it. The narrative he'd planned, troubled scholarship student attacks his son, had been destroyed by dozens of camera angles showing Marcus as the clear aggressor. "There's also the matter of the illegal surveillance," Dr. Chen continued, producing a folder that made the administrator's face pale. "Hidden cameras in a minor's bedroom constitute a federal crime. We've already filed a report with the FBI's cybercrime division." The power dynamics in the room shifted perceptibly. The Wellingtons might have money, but Dr. Chen had evidence of criminal behavior that could destroy more than just Marcus's academic career. In the end, a deal was struck. Marcus would withdraw from Pine Ridge for medical reasons, seeking treatment for the stress-related issues that had led to the incident. Sophia would face no disciplinary action, the school acknowledging that she had acted in self-defense. The surveillance equipment would be removed and a full investigation conducted. Neither family would pursue legal action. As they walked to the parking lot afterward, Sophia finally broke down in her mother's arms, 3 years of suppressed emotion flooding out in tears that seemed endless. "I broke my promise," she sobbed. "I used what Dad taught me." "No," her mother said firmly, holding her daughter tight. "You kept your promise perfectly. You didn't use violence carelessly or from anger. You used it as your father intended, to protect yourself when no other option remained. He would be so proud of you, Sophia, so proud." They drove home in comfortable silence, the mountains blazing with autumn color around them. Sophia touched her father's medallion, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since his death. She'd honored both his training and his values, finding the balance between strength and restraint that he'd tried to teach her. The remainder of the semester at Pine Ridge passed in a strange new reality. Sophia was no longer invisible, no longer the ghost in the corner. Students treated her with a mixture of respect and wariness, understanding that the quiet girl with the physics textbooks was far more than she appeared. Some tried to befriend her, drawn to her newfound notoriety. Others avoided her, uncomfortable with the violence she'd revealed herself capable of. Ms. Sterling became a quiet ally, their shared understanding of military families, creating a bond that transcended the typical librarian-student relationship. She introduced Sophia to resources beyond Pine Ridge's library, connecting her with physicists at nearby universities who were amazed by her theoretical work. "You're not just good at this," Professor Williams from Dartmouth told her after reviewing her quantum entanglement theories. "You're thinking in ways that challenge established paradigms. Have you considered early admission to our physics program?" The opportunity was everything Sophia had worked toward, but it felt hollow without her father to share it with. She visited his grave that winter, snow covering Arlington in pristine white silence. She told him about Marcus, about the fight, about keeping her promise to her mother while still honoring his training. The wind through the bare trees might have been response enough. Spring arrived with acceptance letters from MIT, Caltech, and Princeton. Full scholarships to all three, their physics departments competing for the young woman whose theoretical work was already being discussed in academic journals. Pine Ridge Academy claimed credit for her success, conveniently forgetting how they'd nearly allowed her to be destroyed by one of their donors' sons. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. Sophia stood at the podium as valedictorian, looking out at an audience that included her mother, Ms. Sterling, and the ghosts of everyone who'd tried to break her. Her speech was brief, focused on the power of perseverance and the importance of standing up for oneself and others. She didn't mention Marcus by name, but everyone understood the subtext. Strength, she concluded, isn't about the ability to hurt others. It's about the choice not to, until that choice is taken away. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves, about using power responsibly, about understanding that true courage often looks like restraint. As she left the stage to thunderous applause, Sophia felt her father's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. She'd survived Pine Ridge, maintained her integrity, and honored both her parents' values. The girl who'd entered as a ghost was leaving as something else entirely, a warrior who chose peace, a scholar with the strength to defend it, a daughter who'd made both her parents proud. The summer before college, Sophia received an unexpected package. No return address, just a Washington, D.C. postmark. Inside was a folder marked Classified, Declassified, containing the real story of her father's death. Major Thomas Chen hadn't died in a training accident. He'd died saving 3 Rangers in a mission that couldn't be acknowledged. throwing himself on a grenade to protect his team. The medal inside had never been publicly awarded, the Medal of Honor given in secret for valor that couldn't be revealed. There was a note attached in familiar handwriting. "Your father was the bravest man I ever served with. He would be proud of the woman you've become. If you ever want to know more about his service or explore your own potential for serving your country in unique ways, contact me. Colonel Mitchell Harrison, Defense Intelligence Agency." Sophia held the medal, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. Her father's legacy wasn't just the combat training he'd given her or the values he'd instilled. It was the understanding that strength came in many forms, that service could take many paths, that sometimes the greatest battles were fought in silence and shadow. She tucked the medal next to her father's Ranger tab, twin talismans of a legacy she was only beginning to understand. College awaited, with its promise of new challenges and opportunities. But Sophia knew that Pine Ridge had been more than just high school. It had been a crucible that revealed who she truly was. Not a ghost, not a victim, but a warrior who understood that the greatest victory was often choosing not to fight at all. Looking back at Pine Ridge Academy one last time, as her mother drove them away, Sophia saw Marcus's shadow in her story, not as a villain who'd nearly broken her, but as the catalyst who'd forced her to discover her own strength. She'd entered those gates as a frightened girl, hiding from the world. She was leaving as someone who understood that true power came from the choice of when and how to use it. The road ahead stretched toward Boston and MIT, toward quantum physics and theoretical mathematics that might one day unlock the universe's secrets. But Sophia carried with her the more important knowledge her father had died to protect and her mother had lived to nurture. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That strength without compassion was just brutality, and that sometimes the most important battles were the ones you chose not to fight. As the mountains of New Hampshire faded behind them, Sophia opened her laptop and began working on a new theory, one that connected quantum entanglement to larger patterns of cause and effect. Every action created ripples. Every choice spawned consequences that spread through time and space in ways that classical physics couldn't explain. Marcus's slap had created a cascade of events that transformed everyone it touched. Her response had done the same. In quantum mechanics, observation changed outcomes. The act of witnessing altered reality at fundamental levels. The cameras that had recorded her defense of herself hadn't just captured an event, they'd created a new truth, one where victims could become victors, where ghosts could reveal themselves as warriors, where a 16-year-old girl could stand up to systemic injustice and win. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Watched your graduation speech. Your dad would have been proud. Some of us who served with him are starting a foundation for Gold Star children. Would you consider being our first scholarship recipient? It comes with mentorship from those who knew him best." Sophia smiled, typing back, "I'd be honored." The highway stretched ahead, summer sun warming the car, her mother humming along to the radio. Behind them lay Pine Ridge and all its complicated history. Ahead lay possibilities as infinite as the quantum states she studied. But in this moment, in the superposition between past and future, Sophia existed in perfect peace, carrying her father's strength and her mother's wisdom into whatever battles awaited. The ghost of Pine Ridge Academy was gone. In her place was something far more powerful. A young woman who understood that true strength lay not in the fist, but in the choice of when to close it. Not in violence, but in the restraint that preceded it. Not in dominance, but in the quiet courage to stand up and say, "No more." Her story at Pine Ridge was ending, but her real story was just beginning. And somewhere, in whatever realm warriors went after their last battle, Major Thomas Chen watched his daughter drive toward her future, proud beyond words that she'd learned the most important lesson he'd tried to teach, that a true warrior's greatest victory was teaching others that they didn't have to fight alone. The acceptance letter from MIT was just paper and ink, but it represented something more. Proof that brilliance could emerge from darkness, that trauma could forge resilience, that a girl who'd entered Pine Ridge Academy as a ghost could leave it as something legendary. Not because she'd fought, but because she'd chosen when to stop. As the hours passed and Boston's skyline appeared on the horizon, Sophia began planning her freshman physics project. She would study quantum entanglement, the phenomenon where particles remained connected across vast distances, affecting each other instantaneously, regardless of space between them. It felt appropriate. This investigation into invisible connections and distant influences. After all, she carried such entanglements within herself: her father's training, her mother's wisdom, Miss Sterling's kindness, even Marcus's cruelty had become part of her quantum state. Each interaction changing her in ways that rippled outward through time. She was living proof that observation changed reality, that the act of being seen could transform both observer and observed. The MIT campus buzzed with intellectual energy that made Sophia's nerve endings sing with anticipation. Here were people who understood the language she'd been speaking alone for so long, who saw beauty in equations and poetry and proofs. Her dorm room was small, but hers alone, a scholarship perk that meant she could maintain the solitude she needed to think deeply. She unpacked carefully, placing her father's medal and Ranger tab in a small display case on her desk. They would be her reminders of where she came from, what she'd survived, and what she was capable of when pushed to her limits. But they would also remind her of the choice she'd made every day for 3 years at Pine Ridge, the choice to endure rather than retaliate, to absorb rather than reflect. Her roommate arrived the next day, Keiko Tanaka, a chemical engineering student from California, whose parents had also served in the military. They recognized something in each other immediately, the particular bearing of military children who'd learned to be self-sufficient while young, who understood that home was wherever your family was stationed, who knew that strength came in many forms. "I heard about you," Keiko said, without preamble. "The Pine Ridge thing. The video's been analyzed in self-defense classes. That throw was textbook. It wasn't supposed to happen," Sophia replied. "I spent 3 years avoiding that moment, but when it came, you were ready," Keiko observed. "That's what matters. My mom always says the fights we avoid show our wisdom, but the fights we win show our preparation." They became fast friends, bonding over late-night study sessions and early morning runs along the Charles River. Keiko understood Sophia's need for physical training to balance mental work, the way her body craved the movements her father had taught her, even as her mind reached for theoretical physics that pushed the boundaries of understanding. Professor Williams, who'd recruited her from Pine Ridge, became her advisor and mentor. He was brilliant in the way that made others feel smarter just by proximity, asking questions that opened new avenues of thought rather than providing easy answers. "Your work on quantum entanglement," he said during one of their weekly meetings, "it's not just about particles, is it? You're seeing patterns, connections between things that shouldn't be connected." Sophia nodded, surprised by his perception. "Everything influences everything else," she said. "A bully in a prep school library, a father's death in Afghanistan, a mother's grief, a daughter's choice. They're all entangled, affecting each other across space and time in ways we can barely begin to model." "That's not physics," Professor Williams said gently. "That's philosophy." "Maybe they're entangled too," Sophia suggested, earning a laugh that echoed through his cluttered office. Her first semester passed in a blur of advanced coursework that challenged even her exceptional abilities. But she thrived on the difficulty, finding in academic struggle the same satisfaction she'd once found in physical training. Every problem solved was a victory. Every concept mastered was territory claimed. Winter break brought an unexpected visitor. Colonel Mitchell Harrison, the man who'd sent her father's medal, appeared at her mother's apartment in full-dress uniform. He was older than her father would have been, his face marked by years of difficult decisions and impossible missions. "I served with your father for 5 years," he said over coffee in their small kitchen. "He saved my life twice, probably more if you count the times he kept me from making stupid decisions." He told stories Sophia had never heard, painting a picture of Major Chen as not just a warrior, but a philosopher, a man who read quantum physics textbooks in his downtime and theorized about connections between military strategy and universal forces. "He would have loved to see your work," Colonel Harrison said, pulling out a tablet showing her published papers. He was always talking about how physics and combat were related, forces, vectors, momentum, resistance. He saw patterns everywhere. "Why are you really here?" Sophia asked, recognizing the recruitment pitch building beneath the nostalgia. Colonel Harrison smiled. "You're your father's daughter, direct and perceptive. The DIA has a program for exceptional individuals with unique skill sets. Your combination of theoretical physics knowledge and combat training is unusual. We could use someone who understands both quantum mechanics and practical application." "I'm 17, Sophia pointed out. "Which is why we're talking about possibilities, not commitments," he replied. "Finish your education. Get your doctorate, but know that there's a place for you in intelligence work if you want it. Your father believed in serving something larger than himself. I suspect you inherited more than just his combat training." After he left, Sophia found herself staring at her father's medals, wondering what he would have advised. The path ahead had seemed clear. Physics, research, maybe teaching. But Colonel Harrison had revealed another possibility, one that combined all aspects of her inheritance, her intellect, her training, her understanding that knowledge without application was just theory. She returned to MIT with new purpose, adding coursework in cryptography and international relations to her physics load. Professor Williams raised an eyebrow at her expanded interests, but said nothing, perhaps recognizing that brilliant minds rarely followed single tracks. Spring semester brought a new challenge in the form of Derek Mason, a graduate student who took issue with a freshman making waves in advanced physics. He was brilliant, but insecure, the kind of intelligence that needed to prove itself by diminishing others. He challenged her conclusions in seminars, questioned her methodology in papers, and generally made his displeasure at her presence known. "You're that girl from the viral video," he said one day after she'd presented a particularly innovative approach to quantum field theory. "The one who beat up that kid. Guess MIT's lowering its standards, admitting people based on internet fame." The classroom went silent. Everyone knew Sophia's story by now, knew what she'd endured at Pine Ridge. Derek's comment crossed a line that even competitive academics usually respected. Sophia looked at him for a long moment, seeing Marcus Wellington's spiritual successor, someone who confused cruelty with strength, who needed to tear others down to build himself up. But she also saw the insecurity beneath the arrogance, the fear that someone younger and possibly smarter threatened his position. "You're right," she said calmly. "I did become internet famous for defending myself against a bully. It taught me something valuable, that brilliance without character is just another form of ignorance. Now, would you like to discuss the actual physics of my presentation, or are we done here?" Derek flushed red but had no response. The professor, who'd been watching with interest, began asking questions about her theoretical framework, effectively dismissing Derek's attempted disruption. But Sophia noticed him watching her afterward, something calculating in his expression that reminded her uncomfortably of Marcus before his final escalation. She mentioned it to Keiko that evening, who responded with characteristic directness. "Want me to handle it? My mom taught me some moves that don't leave bruises." "No," Sophia laughed. "I'm trying to get through college without any more viral videos." But Derek's harassment continued, subtle but persistent. He spread rumors about her work being derivative, suggested she was receiving special treatment, even implied that her relationship with Professor Williams was inappropriate. It was more sophisticated than Marcus's bullying, but stemmed from the same poisoned root, the need to diminish others, to elevate oneself. The breaking point came during a department mixer where Derek, emboldened by alcohol and an audience, decided to publicly challenge not just Sophia's work, but her character. "Everyone knows she only got in because of the sob story," he announced loudly. "Dead military dad, viral victim video. MIT loves that diversity narrative." The room went silent. Professor Williams started to intervene, but Sophia raised her hand slightly, asking for space to handle this herself. "You know what, Derek?" she said, setting down her drink and facing him fully. "You're absolutely right. My father's death is part of my story. So is the bullying I endured. So is the video of me defending myself. But you know what else is part of my story? Perfect SAT scores. Published papers at 16. Theoretical work that professors at Dartmouth and Princeton are citing. Meanwhile, your story seems to be a graduate student threatened by a freshman. Which narrative do you think reflects worse on MIT's standards?" The gathered faculty and students shifted uncomfortably. Derek's advisor, Professor Martinez, looked mortified. Derek himself seemed to deflate, the alcohol-fueled confidence evaporating as he realized he'd just destroyed his reputation in front of the entire physics department. "I think," Professor Martinez said into the silence, "that Mr. Mason and I need to have a conversation about appropriate professional behavior." Derek left shortly after, his academic career at MIT effectively over. Sophia felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a tired recognition that some patterns repeated regardless of setting. Pine Ridge or MIT, there would always be those who mistook cruelty for strength, who saw others' success as their own diminishment. Summer brought an internship at a defense contractor working on quantum computing applications for cryptography. The work was classified, requiring security clearances that reminded her of Colonel Harrison's offer. She found herself working alongside former military personnel, people who carried themselves with the same bearing she recognized from her father. "You're Chen's daughter," her supervisor said one day, no question in his voice. "I can see it in how you move, how you think." He was legendary in certain circles. You knew him, knew of him. Operation Ghost Strike is still studied at the War College. 3 Rangers alive today because your father made a choice. He paused, studying her. "Harrison says you might follow his path." "I'm a physicist," Sophia replied. "So was Oppenheimer," he countered. "Sometimes the most important physics happens outside laboratories." The comment stayed with her as she returned to MIT for sophomore year. Her work on quantum entanglement was gaining attention, with invitations to present at conferences usually reserved for doctoral candidates. But she found herself drawn to applications as much as theory, to the places where abstract mathematics met real-world consequences. She was working late in the lab one October evening when the fire alarm went off. Not the usual drill. This was urgent, insistent. Students poured from buildings, gathering in confused clusters. But Sophia noticed something others missed. The pattern of evacuation was wrong. Security was directing people toward the parking lot, not the designated safety zones. Her father's training kicked in. She grabbed Keiko and pulled her in the opposite direction, toward the river. "What are you doing?" Keiko protested. "Something's wrong," Sophia said, her certainty absolute. "Those aren't campus security." They watched from behind a building as uniformed figures swept through the evacuated lab. Not searching, retrieving. This was a targeted operation disguised as an emergency. Sophia thought of her research, the quantum encryption work that had caught military attention, the applications that could revolutionize secure communications. Her phone buzzed. Colonel Harrison. "Are you safe?" His voice was tense. "Yes. What's happening?" "Foreign intelligence operation. They're after your quantum encryption research. Campus security's been compromised. I have people en route, but I need you to do something." "What?" "Your lab computer has a kill switch I had installed during your security clearance. Activate it before they can access your work." Sophia looked at the building swarming with fake security. "That's suicide." "No, it's your father's daughter doing what needs to be done. You have skills they don't expect. Use them." The line went dead. Sophia looked at Keiko, who nodded without needing explanation. "I'll create a distraction," Keiko offered. "My mom didn't just teach me fighting." While Keiko triggered a genuine fire alarm in an adjacent building, pulling the fake security's attention, Sophia slipped back into the physics building through a maintenance entrance she'd mapped during her first week. Another habit from her father's training: always know your exits. The lab was dark except for computer screens being systematically accessed by two operatives. They were professional, efficient, and completely unprepared for a 19-year-old girl who moved like special forces. Sophia disabled the first one with a blood choke that put him out in seconds. The second turned at the sound of his partner falling, reaching for a weapon. But Sophia was already moving, her father's training flowing through her like muscle memory. She struck his wrist, sending the gun spinning away, then drove her knee into his solar plexus. He doubled over, and she finished with an elbow strike that dropped him unconscious. The kill switch was exactly where Harrison had described, hidden in coding that looked like routine maintenance. She activated it, watching her months of research dissolve into digital noise. It hurt, losing that work, but she understood the necessity. Some knowledge was too dangerous to let fall into the wrong hands. Real security arrived as she was zip-tying the unconscious operatives with their own restraints. The FBI followed shortly after, then personnel Sophia recognized as military intelligence. Colonel Harrison himself appeared within the hour, surveying the scene with professional assessment. "Clean work," he said, noting the minimal violence, the precise application of force. "Your father would be proud." "I lost months of research," Sophia replied, exhaustion making her blunt. "You prevented a foreign power from acquiring quantum encryption that could have compromised national security for decades," Harrison countered. "I'd call that a fair trade." The incident was covered up, officially described as a false alarm followed by routine maintenance. But Sophia's professors knew something had happened, saw the change in her. She'd crossed another line, moved from theoretical to practical in ways that couldn't be undone. Professor Williams called her to his office a week later. "Your work's taking a different direction," he observed, gesturing at her recent papers. "More applied, more focused on real-world implementation." "Theory without application is just mental exercise," Sophia replied. "Your father's words." "No, mine." But he would have agreed. Williams studied her for a long moment. "The DIA's been in touch. They want to fund your doctoral work with certain conditions." "I know. You're 19, Sophia. You don't have to choose this path." "I chose it the moment I decided to honor both my parents' wishes," she replied. "My mother wanted me to avoid violence. My father wanted me to be prepared for it. The DIA offers a way to do both, using intelligence to prevent conflicts rather than fighting them." And if prevention fails, Sophia thought of Marcus Wellington, of Derek Mason, of the operatives who tried to steal her research. "Then I'll be ready for that too." Her doctoral work became a balance between public research and classified projects. She published papers on quantum mechanics that pushed theoretical boundaries while secretly working on applications that would revolutionize intelligence gathering. Her handlers at DIA were impressed by her ability to compartmentalize, to maintain her cover as a brilliant but normal graduate student while developing capabilities that would change how America protected itself. The years passed in a blur of conferences and clandestine meetings, of theoretical breakthroughs and practical applications. She learned to speak 7 languages, to read micro-expressions, to hack quantum computers that weren't supposed to exist yet. Her father had taught her to fight with her body. The DIA taught her to fight with her mind. At 23, Dr. Sophia Chen defended her dissertation on quantum entanglements applications in secure communications. The public version was brilliant enough to earn her offers from every major university and tech company. The classified version was already being implemented in intelligence operations worldwide. After the defense, she stood in the cemetery at Arlington, placing her diploma next to her father's headstone. "I kept my promise to Mom," she told him. "I don't use violence unless there's no choice. But I kept my promise to you too. I'm prepared, I'm capable, and I'm serving something larger than myself." The wind through the trees might have been approval. Colonel Harrison met her at the cemetery gates. He'd aged in the years since their first meeting, but his bearing remained military straight. "Ready for your first official assignment?" he asked. "I've been ready since Pine Ridge," Sophia replied. "No," Harrison corrected gently. "Pine Ridge made you a survivor. MIT made you a scientist. What comes next will make you something else entirely." "What's that?" "Your father's legacy. A warrior scholar who prevents wars instead of fighting them. Someone who uses quantum entanglement theory to predict terrorist networks, who applies physics to save lives without anyone knowing they were in danger." Sophia touched the medallions she still wore, her father's Ranger tab and Medal of Honor, hidden beneath her shirt like always. She thought of Marcus Wellington, last she'd heard failing out of his 3rd college, despite his father's donations. She thought of Miss Sterling, now retired but still sending her articles about quantum physics. She thought of her mother, who'd learned to accept that her daughter had found a way to honor both parents' values. "When do I start?" she asked. "You already have," Harrison replied, handing her a folder marked with classification stamps she now had clearance to read. "Welcome to Ghost Strike 2. Your father would be proud." As they walked toward the black SUV that would take her to her new life, Sophia reflected on the journey from Pine Ridge to here. Every moment had been entangled with every other, the bullying that revealed her strength, the violence that taught her restraint, the loss that drove her towards service. She was living proof of her own theories, a quantum entity whose observation changed reality, whose choices rippled through dimensions of cause and effect. The ghost of Pine Ridge Academy had evolved into something far more powerful, a guardian in shadows, a physicist who weaponized knowledge for protection rather than destruction, a daughter who'd transformed grief into purpose. She carried her father's training and her mother's wisdom, Miss Sterling's kindness, and even Marcus's cruelty as parts of her quantum signature, each element contributing to the superposition of possibilities she represented. The SUV pulled away from Arlington, heading toward a future that existed in multiple states simultaneously, academic and clandestine, theoretical and practical, peaceful and prepared for war. Sophia Chen, quantum physicist and intelligence operative, daughter of warriors and healers, was ready for all of them. Her story had begun with a girl sitting alone in a library, choosing invisibility over confrontation. It had progressed through violence reluctantly employed, brilliance gradually revealed, and service deliberately chosen. Where it would end remained uncertain, a probability cloud of potential futures that would only collapse into reality through observation and choice. But one thing was certain: the girl who'd once been Pine Ridge Academy's ghost had become something quantum physics could barely describe. Simultaneously particle and wave, existing in multiple states, affecting everything she encountered in ways that rippled through space and time. She was her father's daughter and her mother's hope, her own person and part of something larger, a warrior who chose peace and a scholar who prepared for war. The road ahead stretched toward possibilities as infinite as the quantum states she studied, and Sophia Chen, armed with equations and training, with loss transformed into purpose, was ready to collapse those possibilities into a future where intelligence prevented violence, where understanding preceded action, where a young woman who'd learned to fight at 7 could spend her life ensuring others never had to.